this was my book that he wanted to. This was not something that I had dumbed down in the hope of getting it out to the widest possible. This was my book, everything exactly as I wanted it on the page, uncensored, unfiltered. It's so rare to be able to work completely uncensored. In 1998, I was hired as the first artist in residence at the prep school from which I had thitherto neglected to graduate. And they brought me in. At that time, I had done stand-up comedy on television a couple of times. I had written for Jay Leno's Tonight Show monologues. I had had my first novel published, a young adult novel called Tale of a Hero and the Song of Her Sword, available at Amazon.com for $7.99. But my point is, I had a resume that anywhere but in LA looks successful. And what the hell was that weird, slow decision to applaud? We think that might be meaningful. Are we clapping now? I guess thank you is the appropriate thing to say. And for the record, everything I do tonight is my own material. But just now, that last pause was created in 1992 by Jake Johansson. So they hired me to show up at Northfield Mount Hermon. And the deal was I was supposed to teach a stand-up comedy writing and performance class and an adventure fantasy writing class, and I was supposed to do 4 performances for the student body. But when I got there, it turned out that nobody had looked at my tape. So they had no idea what I did. And the first day there, the liaison to me said, well, she sent me a Swiss, sorry. This was before everyone had email. And academic institutions had their own email systems, and this one was the school-wide information system, which had already become the acronym SWISS, and then had become a verb. So she Swissed me a note that said, would you be willing, in addition to everything in the contract, to come and introduce yourself at the mandatory gathering of the students at the beginning of the spring term in the chapel? And I said, well, am I allowed to? She said, we want you to do your act, some of your act, and introduce yourself. And I said, well, are there rules about what I'm allowed to say? And she said, no, there's no point in having you here if we're going to water you down. But at that time, I was a left-leaning, machine gun political comic doing, under the Reagan and Bush administrations, what brilliant people like Jamie Kilstein and Lee Camp and John Fugelsang are having success with now. Timing. So I said, great, and I went, and in the chapel, the kids were all gathered up really, actually full. And the faculty and I were all in these stiff-backed chairs in a big semicircle on stage. And the chaplain went up and said some words about God that made me uncomfortable. And then, I'm an atheist. I'm so completely an atheist that when people tell me they believe in God, I don't believe them. And then the president of the school went up and said that they were starting this new artist in residence program and introduced me. And then I went up. And I said things that offended everybody in the faculty. I started by saying that I was very pleased to be there for the term. I was going to use the opportunity to quit smoking pot, which seemed appropriate as it was where I had started. I said that I would try to be a non-judgmental ear if any of the kids wanted to talk to me. I might have a better understanding of their experience than some of the faculty as I had gone to school here. I understood not only the meaning but the proper use of hit towel, which is an arcane bit of prep school pot smokers paraphernalia. I did a little bit of my act. I could hear the people behind me in the stiff-back chairs saying, can we just unplug the microphone? Is there any reason we can't just shut off the microphone? I closed the introduction with a joke that I had written specifically for the occasion that I thought was genius. I'll be here all term. If you want to get my attention, feel free to Swiss me. If you really want to get my attention, feel free to French me. It's a good joke, and the kids loved me. The laughter, the applause out there was tremendous, and the murmuring and discomfort back here was palpable. I came off stage, and the liaison to me ran up to me and said, please don't tell anyone you asked me permission first. Please, please, I have a career on the line here. And I said, it's okay, I'm willing to take responsibility for what I say. I had to go apologize. I had to go to the principal's office. Apologize for things that I did not feel were really worthy of an apology. And my contract was amended so that instead of doing 5 performances, I would do 1 small coffeehouse performance in which I was not to speak of drugs, politics, religion, sex, or curse in any way. So I did an innocuous performance in which I sang songs with the guitar and added in a little segment about the nature of censorship, because that way I could live with myself. It wasn't the first time I made that concession. Years earlier, when I was a machine gun comic on the road, I had been at a club in El Paso, Texas. Apparently somebody knows the club. At that time, I prided myself on my ability to show up in any town in America that I had never seen before, find a dealer, score a half an ounce, and be getting the other comics high before the show on the first night of the gig. And I couldn't figure out why my career wasn't taking off. And in El Paso, Texas, I went up and I was doing 10 to 12 minutes on the drug war and how wrong I thought it was and why I felt marijuana should be legalized. The piece closed with this, you may not know this, George Washington wrote in his private journal, and I quote, "I prefer a pipe full of hemp to a glass of wine any day." Nobody digs the implications of this? We're talking about George, the father, the founder, the first, the guy on our money. We're talking about George going, row! This is great. We'll sneak across the river in the fog. You guys crouch down in the back of the boat. I gotta stand up here with the wind in my wig. This is so cool. Roll! What was I just gonna say? Hey, does it feel to you guys like we've been on the water for days? George getting desperate late at night, scraping the resin out of the wooden teeth, smoking it, getting headaches. A lot of you are a lot hipper than you're pretending to be. In any case, I'd done this long piece in El Paso, Texas, and after I came off stage, the club owner came up to me and said, Dylan, you're very funny tonight. I said, thank you. I'm polite. He said, I'm gonna have to ask you not to do the marijuana material in my club. And I said, well, okay, but I'm gonna have to replace it with everything I've got on censorship. And he said, oh, I don't mean to censor you, Dylan. I just can't have you doing that material in my club. We're trying to sell alcohol here. As if it doesn't count as censorship if it's for purely commercial reasons. I guess I should have been flattered, really. The idea that, that I was so influential as a comic that the entire audience would have heard me do 12 minutes of jokes and then abandoned their drinks, gone to the bathroom, blown a doobie together, and then come back cotton-mouthy to order water for the rest of the night. That wasn't going to happen. But the truth is, it was censorship. It wasn't even a concern about commercial stuff. At that time, there was a war on drugs, and it was politically incorrect to feel otherwise. And he was protecting his own interests, he felt, by protecting the political stance of the club, by telling me what I could and couldn't say on stage. And at this prep school, as I finished up the term, I remember I was getting ready to leave, and I was loading the last of my stuff into the rental car that I was going to take back across Massachusetts to Boston to take my flight home to LA. One of the kids whom I loved in one of my classes, came up to me and said, "So after all that brave talk in the chapel at the beginning of the term, turns out you're as bad as the rest of them." And I said, "I'm sorry I let you down, man, but you know, I wanted to be able to teach you guys. I had to make concessions to the circumstance if I was going to be able to stay." And he shrugged and said, "I don't know what I expected. You're a grown-up. Eventually you all sell out." And then he walked away, leaving me to drive across a whole state with nobody but myself for company, hyper aware that he was absolutely right. I hadn't stayed because I wanted to teach. I'd stayed because I'd booked out the 10 weeks and I couldn't afford to take the loss. In the end, I was no better than that club owner in Texas. I just had the decency not to claim that it doesn't count as selling out if you're only doing it for the money.